Yes, the challenge is on you, Ruben, now to get it done in 10 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, it's working.
Brilliant.
Okay, go ahead, Ruben.
We'll get going now. Brilliant. So let's hope the clicker works. If not, I think Gaten, you can help. Yes. Brilliant. So hello, everyone. My name is Ruben Cruz. I'm a PhD student at the Department of Earth Science Engineering at Imperial College London. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about some of the problems and a bit of the progress that our group has been making on the beneficiation of the lunar regolith. So let's get straight into it. My clicker is not working, so I'm not sure if someone else can change the slide for me. Still not working. There we go. First slide. Brilliant. So, so starting off with the typical flow sheet for lunar ISRU for oxygen extraction. I'm sure many of you have seen this before. It's basically consists of three main stages. So you have your excavation, effectively you're digging up of regolith. You then need to beneficiate this. This is basically screening for a certain size, particle size that you might need, and enriching any minerals of interest for your extraction phase, where you actually liberate said oxygen from whichever mineral, which typically the other word is ilmenite. It's important to mention that things from feedstock throughput to particle size distribution and mineral type constraints for the extraction phase, these are what will drive the direction of excavation and beneficiation. So our group at Imperial comes from a terrestrial mining background, and really our expertise is in beneficiation. So that's what we'll be focusing on in this talk. So what is beneficiation? Basically, it's split into two main areas, size separation and mineral concentration or enrichment. So typically on Earth, in the terrestrial mining sector, these processes are quite water intensive. So for size separation, a very common method is using hydrocyclones to separate out fines and coarses. And for mineral enrichment, you have froth flotation, which is quite very much the industry standard. So as the images suggest and the names, these are both very, very water intensive processes. Which do not make them very well suited for the lunar vacuum. So then that basically means what we need are dry mineral processing or beneficiation methods, which are really non-trivial and not typically very good for fine particles less than a millimeter. So for this reason, basically we need to develop some new, more novel applications or methods of beneficiation for the lunar environment. So starting with size separation, one thing that we've been working on at Imperial is vibratory separation, so effectively the Brazil nut effect. So this video here is one of our master's students looking at vibrating a bed of two different bead types. So the clear beads, which you'll see soon, are much larger and the purple ones are smaller, and the clear ones started at the bottom. And so over the space of about a minute, you find that all the much coarser particles have moved to the top, and we get quite a good separation. And then these can be basically scooped off. The reason that we're looking at this method as opposed to, say, screening or sieving is that sieving is not very effective for small particle sizes, especially highly abrasive particles that can be quite angular or, say, longer, can fall through the gaps, and you don't get a very effective separation. So that's kind of why we thought we might focus on vibration. So we've actually done this now and repeated it using some regolith simulants. So we had a look at JSC1 and LMS1. So this graph on the left is a small amount of JSC1, about a gram. So we see the before and after picture where kind of the regolith is homogeneous, roughly. And then on the right, we see that the larger, coarser particles have come up to settle on the top at the bottom. So we get quite a good separation there. And then we repeated this with the LMS with a much larger amount, a few hundred grams. And we found that there was quite a good segregation between the coarser particles and the much finer particles. So what this basically demonstrates is kind of a very simple method of size separation that could potentially be applied to lunar regolith if you needed to kind of screen out particularly coarse grains or coarse particles. And so moving on from size separation, of course, what I mentioned, the other kind of pillar of beneficiation is mineral enrichment. And for this, what we've been focusing on mainly is electrostatics, more namely freefall separation. So for those of you who aren't familiar with this technique, it effectively involves having two basically electrodes and that have a potential difference across them, and you have a strong electric field between them. And once you drop material down between the electrodes, charged particles will be attracted one way or the other, depending on their charge, both the polarity of the charge, if it's positive or negative, and the saturation charge, or the actual magnitude of the charge, will define kind of how far they'll go or how fast. So an objective of our group recently has been to design and optimize a free-fall separation using tribocharging. And tribocharging, or triboelectric charging, is charging of materials by rubbing them together. And this is particularly promising for free-fall separation method because when you rub materials together, materials with different material properties will gain opposite polarity charge, or at least they will charge to different magnitude level, which is what you need to separate materials using this method. So for those of you, again, who are not very familiar with it, this is kind of an example of how it works. So this is just kind of a calibration test we ran with glass beads, just to kind of give an overview of what's happening. So on the left, there's no electric field, and on the right, there is one. And you see that they kind of agglomerate in a ball when there's no field. Of course, they just fall straight down. And then with the field, at least, we do get much more random motion. And that's basically because we were just charging up some glass beads, and they all charged randomly because it's just a single type of material. So what we want to do basically is better understand the tribocharging mechanism so that we can tailor this to get to basically isolate minerals of choice and better predict how they would behave in the electric field. So to that end, what we've been doing is trying to use Dem modeling to look at the charge transfer mechanism in when you shape granular materials. So this video animation on the left is a Dem model that Joshua put together for basically a mixture of two types of particle spheres. And as the charge builds up, you see the color gets more intense on the particles. And so this is being done to try and basically optimize tribocharger design. So the graph on the right basically is a graph of the animation on the left, where you see the orange and the blue lines are polyamide and polycarbonate charge gained over time while being shaken as a kind of a 50-50 mix in this box. And you see that it increases and then saturates at a level. So this model is compared with some models and experimental results in the literature for similar conditions, and we find that there's a fairly good agreement there. But kind of the crux with these types of models, so you're modeling the contact dynamics, but then you also need to figure out what's actually going on the the actual charge transfer scale, and how do you predict that? And so to that end, we've been doing kind of more fundamental tribal charging kind of work. And so so for example, one of our models suggests that basically for insulating particles, once they saturate, they follow a Gauss's law relationship where you have a 1/r dependence of surface charge density. So if you look at the graph on the left, which kind of suggests what might happen in air, you find that as your particles get smaller, your surface charge density that you can gain, and as such kind of how much this particle will be manipulated in an electric field will go up. But of course, as you increase charge, you're increasing electric field that is created by these particles until you get to the point that eventually you'll have breakdown of the surrounding environment. And so for much smaller particles, you'll find that kind of your expected charge will fall off this 1/r relationship. But this wouldn't be expected in the lunar vacuum, where of course there is no air to break down. So if you were trying to charge up smaller lunar dusty particles, you might find a much larger charge buildup. And so kind of moving on from the models, what you can then do is test this for kind of more specific materials to provide model inputs for the DEM modeling, for example.
Minutes, Ruben.
5 minutes, yeah. All right. So here we have plots of the surface charge, the saturation charge density on PTFE and PVC spheres as a function of 1 over the radius. So we find they do follow this predicted 1/r relationship. And this kind of gives us an insight into the charge we would expect to saturate on these particles. And then with this, we can then predict how the particles will behave in an electric field. So one example, kind of moving on from just mineral enrichment, is things like the electrostatic traveling wave. So one of our new PhD students has been doing some interesting work trying to improve models of the electric field strength at different heights above an electrostatic traveling wave apparatus. And if we can better understand charging mechanisms and tribal charging mechanisms, which are one of the drivers for charge buildup, using this method, it will be easier to predict how particles will behave using this system. But kind of returning to the slide I showed you earlier, looking at beneficiation and the challenges that are faced in the lunar conditions, basically we can conclude that using water-based terrestrial mining standards is really non-trivial in the lunar case. And so that's kind of what we've been focusing on, is trying to look at novel, newer methods for beneficiation. So applying vibrations for size separation, and really trying to take a fundamental approach to understanding electrostatics for mineral enrichment. And the hope really is that this will really enable operability and optimization of extraction processes on the moon, so that we can really improve efficiency of these. That kind of wraps up this talk. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Ruben. Thank you for a very interesting talk. So we got one question from one of the people in the room there, from Thorsten, asking about the energy implications for the system that you've outlined here. Do you have any perspective on how energy intensive it may be when you scale them to perhaps a lunar application?
I don't have exact numbers for the energy intensity. I can tell you that for things like the electrostatic traveling wave, the energy intensity is meant to be very, very low. We're talking watts on like the single digit watts to power these. Then powering something like a free fall separator is the same concept. You're just applying a potential difference across them, so that they are quite energy inexpensive. I can't give you the exact numbers here though.
No problem. It sounds like a promising technology for lunar beneficiation. Thank you, Ruben. So let's move on to our next speaker, who's Volker Hessel. He's going to talk about continuous microfluidic solvent extraction of cobalt from mimicked and real asteroid leaching solutions. And he's from the University of Warwick, I believe. So Volker, if you're there, the room is yours.
Yes, I hope you can hear me. I'm from the University of Adelaide in Australia. Warwick is just my part-time shop, and it's midnight here. But anyhow, I like to talk about the minerals processing of asteroids. And I hope now the clicker works. Okay, it works. I'm the research director of the Andy Thomas Center of Space Resources. You might ask, who is Andy Thomas? He's a little bit like the Neil Armstrong of Australia. He was the first astronaut of Australia. And in 1973, he went to space, and he's a graduate from our school, so from the Mechanical Engineering School at the University of Australia. We recently made the Lunar rover challenge in Australia, which was a big event. And we are dealing with a number of space resource modules in a very wide sense, up to well-being as a space resource, and I'm also busy with that. But today I talk about asteroid mining. Now, if we talk about mining, and I like to talk about cobalt mining, we have to know how this works on Earth. About 50 or 60% of all cobalt on Earth is in Congo, and this is the main mine, which is shown there from Glencore. And that gives us an idea about the dimensions we talk about when we talk about asteroid mining. Now, let me show the following. We made recently a review paper in Angewandte Chemie, which is the second best journal in the field of chemistry. And we gave a vision how to mine asteroids. And main conclusion of this perspective paper was to save water, mainly because of the payload. So we have to work at unusual low water contents in mineral processing. We have some more papers as shown here. And what I talk about here is mainly published in the Journal of Separation Technology, which is the second journal mentioned over here. We have more papers published on circularity, as you see, and also on habitats and hubs. My review on space farming is almost ready to be submitted to Nature Sustainability. Now, if we look on Asterank, which is a common database, we see that the asteroids contain a lot of valuable metals. And I'm part of an initiative, an Australian initiative on critical minerals. So this is a big topic at this point of time, also for geopolitical reasons. Now, I said we have to save water. This gives rise to liquids, which I would say are unseen on Earth. We have to work up to 10 moles per liter. Maybe you have no idea what this means. This is a solution which is cooled down, and you only see metal. You only see the green nickel metal. You see a little bit water. That is what it means to operate with 10 moles per liter. We have very unusual viscosity values, very unusual density values, and this impacts a lot the minerals processing, which we do. Now we use microfluidic processing. Why? Because already on Earth, this has no gravity effect. This capillary, which you see over there, is operated under microgravity on Earth because the capillary forces dominate. So many experts say microfluidics is a perfect technology for chemical processing in space. It's compact, it's lightweight, it can be easily automated. So there are many advantages for the microfluidics. We use here segmented flow. You see the blue segments in a white matrix. And let me go on. We use a particularly intensified solution of the segmented flow, which is the so-called coiled flow inverter. You see we have coiled sections, 4, and we invert the flow. That gives a very effective extraction. Now, I want to talk about the cobalt versus nickel enrichment by continuous flow. We've done this with Kunming University of Technology, which is a prime Chinese mining university. And we have shown that microfluidics are better than batch. That's what you see here. What is given is KLA. This is the mass transfer coefficient of the metals in the solution. We use an extractant, an industrial extractant, which is used in mining industry, which is shown over here. And here we show the KLA mass transfer coefficient. So we can conclude that continuous flow is 7 times better, 7 times more selective, sorry, and 10 times faster than batch technology. And we have a chance for water savings. That was what I initially told you. And these are the publications. Now, if we want to use microfluidics as disruptive technology, we use segmented flow as shown here. And this is a whole system approach. You see the coiled flow inverter plus pumps plus separator of the fluids. We use a second reactor, and I'm actually very happy that Corning supports us. You might not know Corning, but probably everybody of you has seen an iPhone. And Corning, they make the glass for the iPhone, the so-called Gorilla Glass. And in the same sense, they make glass microreactors, and this is shown over here. And they provide kindly the equipment here, which is used as an industrial equipment in many chemical factories in the world to make pharmaceutical molecules. Now, if we look a bit deeper in the Corning reactor, you see a series of heart-shaped cells. This gives a constant perturbation of the flow. It's the so-called re-entrance flow situation. And that is very effective to produce small droplets. And what you also see is you see the course of the extraction changing from a red fluid to the blue fluid when the cobalt goes from one phase, from the aqueous phase to the oily phase. And when it's complexed, then we have the change from a red to a blue color. Now, if we look a bit deeper, we see we have a very high extraction efficiency at a certain pH. So we do process optimization. The second thing which we have to consider is the amount of the transfer agent, which I shown before, the Cyanix 272. And we also get an idea which is the optimal value for that. Now, knowing this, we can make an optimized experiments, and we make it at a very high concentration, as said before. And again, I claim they are unseen on Earth. They have not been processed before. And here we see a 1 mole per liter solution. We come to 90% extraction efficiency, which is good. This is standard in mining industry. But if we go higher, we go to very high molar solutions, and then we have a problem. We have 40% extraction efficiency, and later I show 60%. So here we have to do re-engineering of the minerals processing. If you talk about productivity, I clearly would say, yes, we are not there. We have to develop reactor concepts which can process much more. But what I can say here is we have reasonable extraction efficiencies up to 500 milliliter per hour. So if I transfer this in a productivity per day, I can say we have 100 to 150 grams of cobalt, which we can produce. So we are not at the industrial kilo lab yet, but we are also not miles away from an industrial kilo lab, and we know how to go there. But to replace a whole mine, like I've shown before from Congo, we have to go to tons, not to kilograms. And here we see 40% extraction efficiency for the high concentration, but I told you we have higher value. So we have 60% finally, which is not shown here. Now, if we compare the two modules, you might remember we have the coiled flow inverter and we have the Corning reactor. We can use the Corning reactor to increase the productivity by adding a number of modules. This is what is called numbering up in microfluidics. And you see it works. It's not a phenomenal increase, but we can increase the productivity. And finally, what I want to show you is the comparison between the two reactors, as said, the coiled flow inverter and the Corning reactor. And we compare them by the energy use, by the power use. And the Corning reactor consumes much more power than the CFI. But that can be optimized, and that is not the final answer, but okay, that is the picture as it is now. Now, finally, you might say all this modeling of simulated asteroid mixture is not of big meaning. So show me the extraction of a real asteroid. And we did it. I have to say thanks to the colleagues of the University of Tokyo. Hideki Miyamoto, he is the one who designs all the Japanese asteroid missions. So Ryugu and Hayabusa, and he owns the Space Museum in the Tokyo Dome. He gave me this Campo del Celio meteoroid who fall down on Earth 5,000 years ago in Argentina, and it's the third largest meteoroid ever hit the Earth. Now with Aqua Regia, we could leach this meteoroid, and finally we could show that we can extract it as given here. My last slide, that's the end of my talk, is on societal impact. I really enjoy working on space. It gives a lot of context to young people, to students. It gives a lot of context to media. And I'm proud to say that we had the first Australian experiment on ISS ever. And that's an experiment on space medicine, which is now just working. And the work here is related to that. I also am underway to publish a book on in-space manufacturing and resources. I will launch in 1 month a new journal on space exploitation, as you see over here. And we have a lot of newspaper and TV and radio resources. We had 63 web releases in 1 year, and 40 of them roundabout are on asteroid mining, as you see here in all kinds of languages. And this is a premiere of South Australia. This is the first student on the industrial space experience, and she did asteroid mining with us. Thank you for your listening.
Thank you, Volker, for that very interesting talk. It's very novel to see microfluidics applied in this particular way. So I have one question for myself and one from the audience that I can see. From the audience first, one question will be from Torsten Denk. What's the smallest grain size that could be separated with the method? That's the question he's asking.
I don't get the question. What do you mean with grain size?
I guess what's the smallest kind of unit that your method can engage with, you know? Well, maybe that's maybe it's the wrong way to phrase the question. We can discuss that in the chat, but I would like to ask you a question from my side. Sorry for not
understanding it as a chemical engineer.
No worries. The question from my side then is applying it to a space environment in terms of things like packaging and environment. You were testing these at normal atmosphere and in normal conditions. How would you see this being applied, in situ?
Yeah, we have to. As I said, we have an ISS experiment on the cosmic ray stability of medicines. We have to make similar experiments on ISS on the space mining. I just got the invitation to a parabolic flight where we probably will apply such kind of experiment. We have the microgravity machine of Airbus Industry, the random positioning machine 2.0, and we will investigate with this machine microgravity on Earth. So we do our best to get realistic data, but this is all done with a minimal amount of funding at this point of time, and we do our best to make realistic experiments.
Great, thank you, Volker. And at least now I know somebody who's actually put the meteoroid in Aqua Regia. That's a brave move, so nice to see it. Okay. Moving on to our next talker then, it's Simon Stapperfend from TU Braunschweig. He's going to talk to us about identified research needs for additive manufacturing with Molten Lunar Regolith. So Simon, if you're there, the room is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me. So Perfect. Yeah, as already said, my name is Stapperfend. I'm a research fellow at the Institute of Space Systems right now, and we will be moving to the TU Berlin in the next weeks. So just so you know that. And my main research field is about robotics and lunar ISRU. So for example, I've worked again at the Moonrise payload, and right now my PhD is about the additive manufacturing with molten lunar regolith. And let me tell you what that is. So the main focus is that we want to use structures on the moon using only the lunar regolith and electrical energy. So we don't want to use any additional binder materials that we have to bring from Earth to the moon. And so we want to reduce the potential costs of a lunar base. The concept here, where we also want to order the parts right now for the first prototype, is that we have a vacuum chamber in which we mount our printhead, which consists of a crucible, insulation, and heating elements. And the heating elements then transfer the heat to the crucible. Inside of the crucible, we have the regular simulant, which then melts. And if the viscosity is right, so the temperature is high enough, the melt drips out of the nozzle on the bottom side of the printhead or out of the crucible onto a regular print bed, which is then moved in 3 axes by several motors. The concept shows that the first layer is the molten regolith on side of granular regolith, and then if it cools down and created some kind of obsidian or glass, the next layer can be applied, and so you can create relatively big 3D structures if you mount it on a rover or a robotic arm. And it shows a lot of potential for the further construction of a lunar base, for example, if you want to build habitats or landing pads and so on. For our test, we want to use the lunar regolith simulant TUPS M and TUPS C, which are invented at our university. So we have TUPS M, which is for the Mare regions of the moon, and TUPS C for the highlands. The main advantage of this system is that we can reproduce literally any location on the moon by adding these 2 basic simulants and also adding glasses, agglutinates, and some other minerals. So if someone wants to test his payload, for example, on a specific location on the moon where you know the composition of, we can recreate this by our system. So if anyone is interested in samples or collaboration, feel free to write me an email. You can find my email address down below. We did the first testing of the melting of the lunar regolith with our TUPS M simulant under air conditions. And you can see it on the left side, for example, where we had the printhead, which was filled with regolith, then heated up until it was molten, and then dripped out of the printhead and created some kind of artificial lava, which cooled down and created this pillar of regolith, which you can see in the middle. And it showed that it is already feasible to do that. In our second experiment, we used the molten regolith and moved the printhead during that, and to create some kind of layered structure, which you can see on the bottom right. And you may also see that there are some cracks inside of the glass. That is mainly due to the cooling behavior of the regolith under air, because we have convection, of course, which is much faster in cooling than only radiation. That is why it's important for us to test it in the vacuum and see if this material is possible, for example, for habitats or landing pads. So how the cooling behavior is indicating the mechanical properties. During our research, we also tested some materials. For example, we tested silica, and we saw that there's a lot of risk for the hardware. For example, we can see on the left image, we used also the TUPS M simulant, which broke the mold while cooling because the regolith wetted the mold, and by cooling and so we wanted to release the glass, the mold broke. And therefore, if you want to have a process that you can always restart, you really want a process which is not wetting the mold. You want a mold which is not wetted by the regolith. The same applies for the melting process itself. So we had the issue that we used a mold which had a small fine crack, and that damaged our furnace a lot. So you really should take into account that the containment material should be really usable for those high temperatures in the harsh environment. So the first research need that we identified is the requirement of to withstand high temperatures. We are talking about temperatures higher than 1,350 degrees Celsius. at least for the TUPS-M simulant. If you, for example, use Highland simulant, it can get much higher. So it really depends on the chemical composition of the regular simulant, and of course also the environment. For example, what the pressure is, if you have some kind of gases in there. Yeah, and that is not suitable for a lot of materials. Using it in a vacuum makes it a little bit easier. So you can use some metals that otherwise would oxidize and get damaged, or you can use graphite, for example. So that's just a requirement that we are currently taking a look at. Also, it is very important that there's no chemical reaction between the melt and the containment material. So as I said, we want to use it a lot of the time, and we don't want to always change the hardware just because a crucible got damaged. And also the chemical reaction may reduce the melting point of the Regolith and build eutectica, which you really don't want. And yeah, we want to use some containment material which does not react with the melt. Also, as I said, the wetting is quite important. And there are not a lot of research being done in that field. I think Miranda Fateri did something about that, but it's not too deep for now. And that is what we are researching right now. Also, we have the requirement, of course, if we want to use high temperature, we need good thermal properties, and mainly the high thermal conductivity for the crucible, for example, is very important. If you think about heating a crucible and inside of the crucible, the Regolith, you want to have a uniform melt in order that you can know the properties of the Regolith. And that's why high thermal conductivity is really important for the containment material. Also, if you want to have rapid processes, you need good thermal shock resistance and high emissivity. So a lot of the radiation that comes from the heating elements gets absorbed by the crucible, and therefore you increase the heating times of the Regolith. And of course, you need good mechanical properties of the containment material so it doesn't get cracked and it can withstand some forces. So you can always potentially send it to space or test everything with that in a first prototype without the danger of it failing due to some cracks or porosity. So as I said, the first research need is to find a material that is really suitable for long-term operation on the moon and in a vacuum chamber. And we have identified some materials for that we will test in the next weeks, or when we have the first prototype set up. And then we want to release the findings in a paper so other researchers can see what material was the best for us and also which didn't work. And I found out in the research that a lot of researchers which work with molten lunar regoliths did not publish, for example, the behavior between the regolith and the containment material. And a lot of research was not published yet because maybe they thought it's not important for the research, but it may be important for other research. So if you're working in that field, please make sure to publish every information that you have because it may be important for other researchers in the community. For my last slide is the properties of regoliths that we want to characterize, especially for our simulants. And as we are talking about molten lunar regoliths, of course, we want to have the thermal properties. These are not really researched that deeply right now, and we want to tackle that a little bit. For example, we want to measure the specific heat of the lunar regoliths while heating, so over time, which is quite important also for thermal energy storages. So you can survive the lunar night maybe while heating or while just saving energy inside of the regolith. And we want to have a lot of characteristic temperatures. For example, the glass transition temperature, the crystallization temperature, or the melting temperature. This is not a point of temperature, but rather than a range due to the complex chemical composition of the lunar regolith and the different minerals that are inside of the regolith, depending on the location, of course. And we want to do it for our both simulants, TUPS-M and TUPS-C, and then enhance our data sheets that we already have of them, so further researchers can rely on the data. We also want to measure the enthalpy, so how much energy we have to put into the system in order to melt the regolith. And that is also depending on the minerals. So when do the minerals crack open and get fluid? And that is one thing. And also the released gases. So there's a little bit of research going into that field. So which gases are released during which vacuum. And that is quite important for us also for the containment material. So we know that the containment material won't react with the gases that are being released by the melt. And we plan to do experiments in the next month for DSC, TGA, and mass spectroscopy, and also want to release a paper about that. So if you're interested in that, feel free to write me, and then I can tell you the update about the current research that we do. Also, we have some additional research planned, which is of course important for our current situation, which is for one, the viscosity. So we saw that an increase in temperature reduces the viscosity, so it's get better fluid. And maybe we can change the process parameters by just changing the temperature. So if we want to have finer structures, for example, we can increase the temperature and therefore reduce the viscosity. But the viscosity is very hard to measure in the laboratory, at least for the high temperatures. There are some formulas that you can use for the chemical composition, but they may not apply in real world. So we have to measure that, but we don't know how yet. Also, the mechanical properties. So after you printed the parts and the structures, are they suitable for example, for habitats? Are they suitable for landing pads, for solar array structures? And these are all very important things that we can just test after we printed the first parts. For now, also, we only have batch operation planned. So we want to go further for a conveyor with continuous operation. And we tested some conveyor mechanisms and none of them worked for now. So we may also look into vibration to transfer the Regolith into the chamber. And last but not least is the emissivity or cooling behavior. For example, you can see on the bottom right, while cooling, even under air, we saw some crystalline phases in the Regolith glass. And it might be that the cooling behavior influences the material properties to that extent that we have to take a deeper look into that, so that we don't get glass, but we get maybe some glass ceramics, some compositions between crystalline and glass. And we want to see how it influences the structural behavior. Yeah, and thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, feel free to write me. I attached here my Gmail address. So because we're moving to TU Berlin right now, I don't know how long you can access me with my TU Braunschweig email address. So yeah, feel free to write me at Gmail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon, for a very interesting talk. Just one or two quick questions before we move on to the next speaker. Just monitoring the chat there, there's a question there, technical question. How do you actually keep the Regolith molten inside your print head? Has that been an issue that you've encountered?
So of course, we want to heat it by radiation. So we have, for example, electrical energy by solar arrays, which will heat the Regolith inside. And for now, we have batch operations, so it flows out when it's liquid enough. And we want to keep it molten by just putting further energy. So for now, it's just, as I said, batch operation. For continuous operation, we will have to take a deeper look into that after it works.
Great, great. And you also made a kind of call for people who are working in this area who might have seen interesting wetting behavior and so forth. Feel free to talk to myself as well, Simon. We've seen similar kind of effects like wetting, like Marangoni effects and everything from melting regolith. So it's quite interesting material when you start playing around the temperature. But I agree with you with the information we should be sharing with the wider community.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you for that talk, Simon. Next up, then it's Jörg Neumann from the Laser Zentrum Hannover to talk to us about mobile selective laser melting of lunar regolith. So, Jörg, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk here. I will report on mobile selective laser melting of lunar regolith, and this is a collaboration between the Institute of Space System of the Technical University of Braunschweig and the Laser Center of Hannover. It seems the clicker is not work. Can one switch to the next slide, maybe? Sorry. I try again with the clicker. Sorry for that. Yeah, now it's work. Sorry again. So we developed already a roadmap for ISRU construction on the moon. So as Simon said in the previous talk, so the additive manufacturing of lunar infrastructure with lunar regolith would reduce space transport efforts immensely. So we already did some experiments on Earth, on ground, for laser sintered objects made with commercial machine for 3D printing, but it's of course impossible to fully simulate the lunar environment on Earth. So to have the low gravity to really simulate the regolith, and maybe there are also other unknown, unpredictable effects. Therefore, our goal is to develop a proof of principle payload for additive manufacturing of the moon. So on the moon. So to make small proof of principle experiments, so really on the small scale with this so-called moonrise payload, and then later go to system and process scaling and automation for larger structures, and maybe help to build the moon village. So on the next slide, we will go for laser melting of lunar regolith as our technology approach. So because it does not need any consumables or binders, so there's also no need of regolith pre-processing, and it's mobile, it's independent from direct sun incidence, and with a laser, with a small laser spot, you can achieve a good manufacturing precision. It's also a scalable process, so you can parallelize and also automatize this process. So this process we call it mobile selective laser melting, shortly MSLM. And with this proof of principle payload, we want to prove it on the lunar surface. So we want to go there for regolith pearls, which means so really 0D structures, lines, 1D structures, and areas. And the success criteria would be the observation of the process with a camera and taking photos. And from this input, we would like to learn on the behavior of the melting behavior directly on the moon as an input for future process scaling along our roadmap. We use the modular regolith simulant system Simon already described in the last presentation. So there is this lowland and these highland simulants, and you have you can mix them locally to have a specific mixture according to the landing place site, and you can add minerals there to chemically adapt the mixture, and also add sintered particles and molten glass to physically adapt this regolith simulants. Then we went further to check for the process feasibility. We had a lab setup. We tried their different simulant composition, TUBS-M, TUBS-T, and also intermediate, and we processed them with a laser in vacuum with a fixed spot, and then you create these pearls, which can be seen on the right side with like 3 millimeters in diameter. And the fusion starts at 35 watts of optical power at 1 micron wavelength, and you only use a few seconds for creating one of these pearls. And all tested types of regoliths we used could be processed with quite good reproducibility. And with this lab setup, we can deduce the moonrise payload requirements and deduce also the optical configuration. So which type of laser source we have to use, which laser power, spot size, beam guiding, and also working distance towards the ground to prevent the optics from contamination. With this, we built a robust engineering model on the one hand to generally demonstrate that such a payload is feasible in a certain volume and mass budget, but also to further verify the MSLM process on ground under more realistic conditions, and there you need a rugged instrument. So we built this Moonrise engineering model. It consists of a laser and a driver and some optics for beam forming, and which directs the laser beam towards the ground. There is an LED for illumination of the target site and some system communication. On the lower left, you can see the engineering model on the one picture opened, and on the other picture with a hermetically sealed housing. This is to prevent it from contamination. It's mainly based on components commercial off the shelf. And with this engineering model, so we have optical output power capabilities up to 140 watts. Our baseline is 70 watts. And as I told in the last slide, so laser melting starts at 35 watts. The power consumption for the baseline is about 170 watts, and the mass is 2.5 kilograms with further potential for mass reduction, and the size is 1.5 CubeSat units. And the distance to the ground you need is about 25 centimeter. And we also get some preliminary temperature data from emission scenario, which is also showed here. The engineering model is working with a fixed laser spot, so you need to add some mobility, which can be done by a rover or robotic arm to also create 1D or 2D structures. And the experiment verification, the observation with the process should be made by external cameras, which are usually available on a rover or on a robotic arm. We tested this engineering model with the typical vibration values. There was a minor issue with the laser driver, which could be easily resolved by some changes. We also did thermal vacuum testing for storage and operating. We saw some gradual decrease at higher temperatures, but it was reversible and sufficient to fulfill the mission goals. So with this engineering model, which is quite rugged, we went to the so-called Einstein Elevator here in Hannover. This is an active drop tower where you can make experiments under varying gravitation. So you can adjust the gravitation there between microgravitation and 5G. You have flight duration experiment duration about 4 seconds, and you can repeat it up to 300 times per day. And it's a very big thing, so you can accommodate a payload of 1 ton. And with this, and the engineering model, we made experiments under Earth gravity, moon gravity, and also microgravity. For this, we integrated our experiment in the Einstein Elevator, which can be shown on the lower left. We have this Moonrise engineering model. We have a vacuum chamber where the regolith is placed. We have a sample illumination and a high-speed camera operating at 400 frames per second to observe the process. And the laser melting duration has to be decreased a little bit because of the only 4 seconds experiment duration, and therefore we increase the optical power a little bit, which is doable with the engineering model. We had to slightly compress the regolith in its container, which can be seen in the picture in the middle. This is because you have acceleration and deceleration phases, and there you would mess up with the regolith in the vacuum chamber, and therefore we compressed it. And on the right, you can see the experiment integration into this Einstein Elevator. The process itself can be divided into 5 phases. You see first the Regolith container. Here there is uncompressed Regolith. So the experiment here is under 1G. Thank you. And you start the melting process. In picture 2, some simulant particles are injected, and you see also on the lower right the different trajectories when the particles ejected. They depend, of course, on the gravitational environment. On picture 3, you see then where the sphere of molten simulant is growing, and on picture 4, you see the cooling phase, and on picture 5, the solidified sample is removed. If you look at the results, so the samples created under the different gravitational conditions are quite similar. So you have this pearls with 3 millimeter in diameter. And also, if you look at the density, it's only 50% of the density of regolith. And if you do some microsections or even micro CT, which is also depicted here, you can see that there are big voids inside these samples. And for microgravitation, they are a little bit more equally distributed. But in principle, the process works at all gravity conditions. After having the process verified under lunar gravity, we also tested the engineering model on a robotic arm to create larger objects. This could be only done under atmospheric conditions. And there we put the engineering model to this robotic arm. We moved it with 1 millimeter per second at a laser power of 120 watts. And there we can create this 2D structures by writing adjacent lines. And we had to switch off the laser between the lines to limit the deposited heat and avoid cracking. But nevertheless, we created 2D objects 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters with 4 millimeters in depth. In summary, we have a proof of concept of laser-based fusion as part of the roadmap for 3D printing of regolith structures on the moon. We performed a laboratory study for payload design. We built an engineering model which was environmentally tested, and the melting process was verified on ground with the engineering model and a vacuum condition under lunar gravity condition, and with 3D and with writing 2D objects with a robotic arm. And in further work, we want to extend our ground-based test program for further regolith composition and also for larger structures, even 3D structures. We want to further work on a flight model and improve our engineering model. And in the end, we would like to verify the MSLM process with this Moonrise payload as a proof of principle in a realistic environment on the moon. And also we would like to develop strategies for the generation of larger structures, for example, with 2D laser beam deflection, laser power scaling, parallelization, and also autonomous operation. So with this, I would like to thank you for your attention. I would like to acknowledge the Volkswagen Stiftung, which funded this project. And on the right, I would like to show also first 3D structures we have written with the engineering model. These are 7 adjacent layers on top. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm open to your questions.
Thank you, Jörg. Very interesting demonstration of this technology, which will be very important in the future. Exactly 15 minutes, I'm afraid. So I think we might have to leave the questions to the chat. I would ask to maybe pay attention and see if anyone has any questions for you there. But I'd like to move on now to our next speaker. So this is Michelle Lavagna from Politecnico di Milano, to talk to us about the oxygen extraction through regolith thermal reduction. So Michelle, if you're available, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks a lot for your introduction. And I would like to acknowledge the co-authors from Politecnico di Milano and from OHB Italia as well, who are working on the project. And of course, acknowledge the ESA financing as what I'm going to show is part of a study that is ongoing on the on-ground demonstration for one of the technique for extracting oxygen from the regolith, as the title is saying. So just a few recap on the goals of the study. It is basically focused on a very specific process to extract oxygen, or let's say water as a first stage from the dry regolith, no matter of the feedstock that is input in the plant. And then, of course, to do ground demonstrations for the process to assess the main parameters and, of course, the yield that can be obtained from that. And in parallel, to build up and refine the mathematical models according to this process. That is not a new process, but according to the tuning that we are proposing, it's a bit different from the classical one. So what you see in the sketch is the logic of the process. Of course, we start with inputting two kinds of gases. Basically, this is a thermal reduction with carbon, but to save mass, let's say, the idea is to bring methane and to include hydrogen for reducing somehow the coke formation and alternating the flux of the mixture, so methane and hydrogen, with just the flux in hydrogen. There is a first main reactor that is focused, of course, in producing the syngas. So the core of the process and the feasibility of what we are proposing stays there, because what we want to obtain is the CO, basically output. And then we keep on going, entering in a second stage, still hot, but a lower temperature. So with a classical methanation step to get back to the methane through the CO and CO2 entering together with the hydrogen, the second reactor, and obtaining the water. Then this is a gas mixture at high temperature, and so it is needed to lower the temperatures to separate the water from the rest. And in this way, we get high sea water and the rest of the gases that, of course, in the ground plant, as we are going to see, are left burning out, while in the real application, in the potential real application, could be recycled to get back to the initial process, let's say, and keep on going. So which is the novelty in that and the robustness in that? Of course, the carbothermal reduction is well known, but typically is applied for obtaining the silicon or the metals, not the syngas, that is the byproduct. Now we focus on the byproduct, vice versa, but we also have the benefit of having, if needed, the metals to be then processed the more afterwards. Of course, in the classical process, it is a high temperature is reached in the main reactor, so the yield is quite high. But there is the drawbacks of having, of course, the clogging of the reactor, because the whole feedstock is melted. So the idea is not to reach the melting temperature, to work at the lower temperature, just below the melting, for the silicon at the most, because it's the largest component that we have, and work with that, keep the feedstock as a sand, basically. So the proposal is that not to have, so to have a reaction with a solid gas that simplifies the technologies and the operations of the plant, to have no moving part apart for this charge and discharge robotics, so during the process, so simplifying the overall plant, and then to be scalable. And as you saw, with the possibility to recycle, because at the end of the story, the gas that we obtain are still methane and hydrogen that could be inserted again in the plant. So this is the basic schemes of the plant that also report what we have in our labs. So you see the fluidics and the gas storage at the first, at the very left, then the central reactor that it is brought at a very high temperature. Then the middle reactor that is just a catalytic bed for having the Sabatier reactions, and then the condenser to extract the water. Of course, you see again the violet recycling stage that is not built in the lab because it was not the scope of the topic now. So here you are, the plant that we have in the lab, very quickly, all the characters that we have. So from the left to the right, the main furnace, you see it opened. So the very slender element is the main furnace. The rest is for the thermal regulation. We work, as you will see in a while, at 1000 Celsius degrees, roughly speaking. This is a commercial oven. Now we are in a situation in which we are inserting in the plant a new main reactor that has been customized and built by OHB, dedicated to that. Then you see the main carousel that is basically that contains in the upper part you see the methanator, the small reactors, and in the bottom part the condenser. So it's a fridge that goes at -50 to condensate the water, and of course the flow meters and all the control point and measurements point that goes to the gas chromatographers. That is the core of the measurements. And the very right, you see the fridge and the element in which we collect the icy water at the end of the experiments. So of course we also did some characterizations of our simulants. We are working just with the Highlands simulants. We also have the Maria in-house, but still to be applied to the process to understand some of the parameters to set up not only the test, but also the plant. We needed to understand the granulometry, of course, the compositions. You can also see the XRD for the mineralogy understanding, and then also the SC that was fundamental to fix the maximum temperature to work with at the very right part. That states that we could go up to 1100 Celsius without having any melting events. That is our critical point. So some results for the test that we did. I just want you to focus on the table on the right, and then of course the graph that is the output of the first point of measurements. So the exit point of the first reactor, that is the critical quantity we track, so the CO production basically. So we played a bit with the mixture in terms of hydrogen, methane inserted in the main reactor. We played, don't look at the mass because the first was just a test, so we stay stuck on 1 kilos inside the reactor, and then we played a bit with the temperatures, as you can see, and the and basically the flow is fixed. So you can probably appreciate those sort of peaks. I'm talking about them a little bit afterwards. They are basically due to the alternations of the fluxing of methane and hydrogen, and to do the washing just with the hydrogen to reactivate the feedstock, removing the hash that is created because of the peculiar mechanism to have the reaction occurring in the main reactor. So a bit of details of the sensitivity analysis done. Of course, this is the table as the same table as before, just focusing on the tests that are reported at the very left, in which we focus on 1 parameters per time. So changing the mixture, changing the temperature, and then the mass. As expected, of course, the decrease of the methane is detrimental for the first peak, but it could be considered for the continuation, so the integrals of the whole yield, while the temperature increase is definitely beneficial. The graphs that you saw, that you see at the bottom reports basically the same trend. So it's the mass in terms of carbon deposit inside the main reactor, and the overall net mass with respect to what we have as a solid inside the main reactor. Of course, depending on the mixture, there is an increase of the net mass for the positions of the methane, but sorry, the positions of the carbon, of course. But still, this is a good. It's something positive with respect to the main peak that we obtain, that then is connected with the overall efficiency of the system, so the overall CO percentage output.
4 minutes, Michelle.
Yeah, very quickly, what we did, because this is a very important point of tuning the process, is the alternation, the durations of the alternation. What you see in these graphs on the left is a long washing with just hydrogen, while on the right you have a short mixture with long washing. That is that we identified in the bunch of tests that we did. That is better to let's say reactivate the mechanism. If you follow the blue line, you see that definitely that it is definitely better in terms of peaks recovered after each washing phases with just the hydrogen. Here you can appreciate what we obtain condensed as an ice, and then of course after some time at room temperature, one of the experiments with the water production, and the wasted, so the final regolith that we output from the main furnace, that is quite sandy, so no plugging or no sintering experience. That was a very nice results from our point of view with the temperature that we adopted. We also analyzed the feedstock afterwards to have a trace that we still have to analyze the more with respect to what has been attacked and what didn't change. Of course, we have the bubbles, as you already showed in the talks before, because of the temperature and because of the silicon we have in. I just want to quickly rush at the end, showing you what we did from the modeling point of view. So we did first an analysis in terms of thermodynamics, so the possibility to have something happening. Now I don't enter in the graphs singularly, of course, but we analyzed the reactions with methane, starting from the minerals that we have in, so to identify the free energy the free reaction occurrence possibility. And at the very end, we identified, at least from the thermodynamics point of view, a reason why for having the reaction occurring, even if we are not melting the silicon components. And this is because there is a path for creating silicon gaseous components that allows the reaction with methane happening at a very lower temperature. So just not entering in that, I conclude the presentation just showing you what we are doing with the kinetics. So thanks to the data that we are acquiring through the tests, we are now capable to build up models for the kinetics, not only for the carbothermal reaction only, but also for the fluxing part, so the just hydrogen passing on. And you see three approaches that we are keep on going. One is basically with a mathematical model parametrically phased. The central one is a data fitting, and the other one at the very right is with a precise modeling for the chemical kinetics that focus just only on the carbothermal part. So as I don't want to waste time, I conclude my presentation saying that our experiments so far confirmed that the possibility to obtain water from the solid gas reaction, to keep on going with the reaction. So just not having one flux and that's it, but having this sort of cycling with the same batch of regolith up to wasting and removing all the oxygen that we can. Operations are quite simple. There is no showstopper from the technology point of view, as we identified so far. And of course, we keep on going doing our experimental campaign for getting more data for consolidating the results. I didn't show all the stuff that we did for the methanation stage, but this is something that is quite well known. It was just a confirmation also experimentally that everything works nicely from at least as we expected, let's say. So that's it, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, Michelle. I think that's a really interesting set of results and information you presented us on the carbothermal process. A lot of really interesting technical elements there. Maybe just a question from myself, a quick one. You mentioned that this process is targeting 1,100 degrees at the moment. If, for example, you could reach the 1,300 temperature range, would you expect to see a much more significant reaction or faster kinetics and more product?
Just to get, if I correctly understood your question, so you are asking me if increasing the temperature we expect to increase our yield? Yes, of course, for sure, quite largely. But the point is that the technology should change completely, because at that point we will have some relevant melting effects in the reactor. And so we have to think about a different approach for the main reactor technology building, let's say, not such a simple, let's say, discharge as we have so far. So it's a matter of trading off the time that we want to put in place for getting the water. And so if this is a strong driver, let's increase the temperature. If this is not a strong driver, we can just take our times and produce without any other complexity.
Great, thank you for answering my question, Michelle. And there's a few other questions in the chat, so maybe you can have a look at those as well. Okay, to keep on schedule, I'd like to move on to our next speaker. So Alexander Maurice, speaking for Beth Lomax on the European Space Agency and University of Glasgow. And the talk is Progress Understanding Lunar Oxygen Extraction with the FFC process. So Alexander, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Aiden. So yes, as Aiden mentioned, I'm pleased to give this talk on behalf of my colleague Beth Lomax, a PhD student at Glasgow University and ESA. And basically, I'm going to report the progress we've made on the process, on the FFC process. So I will remind everyone what the process is about. We'll show you exactly what we have at ESTEC in the Netherlands as a facility. And we get into the update and the future work for advancing the process. So the FFC process is a molten salt electrolysis. So you saw one already earlier today. So the idea is not to dissolve here the regolith in the salt, but really to have the regolith as a cathode. And then by applying potential with an anode, we can have a direct deoxidation of the metal oxide. So this is really straightforward. And if your anode is made of graphite or any other form of carbon, you will form CO2 or CO. But of course, in space, we would target to have an inert anode to produce oxygen instead. This process has been already shown, like I think 2 times, and in 2019, my colleague Beth has shown that you can actually extract 100% of the oxygen which is present in the lunar regolith simulant to turn this powder into metallic powder. So at ESA, in ESTEC, we have improved a lot our facility. So now we have like 2 FFC reactors where we can extract tens of grams of lunar regolith. So this is from 10 to 50 gram scale. We can analyze the gas in a quantitative manner now. So before that, we didn't have such mass spectrometer. So now every oxygen we extract, we can actually monitor it. But usually you can lose some oxygen on the way. It's good to cross-check what your result with what's left in the byproduct, because in the end, that's let's say the ultimate truth, what's left in your metal powder. So for that, we have a quantitative oxygen analyzer, where basically we take some milligram of our sample and we burn it to 2000, 3000 degrees to extract all the oxygen and monitor and count it. So with that, we have a clear proof that how much oxygen is left in our sample. But with this big cell, we don't have a very high throughput of experiment. We can just do 1-2 per week. So we have also a mini FFC cell, which is very useful for rapid testing. We can also do some complex electrochemistry with also looking at cyclovaltrometry to really understand which, let's say, mineral reduce at which when. And also we can also analyze some rarer minerals. So with all this set of equipment, the first objective of our research was to see if we could reduce the temperature of the FFC process. So the proof of concept, was made at 950 degrees. This is salt melting point, which is 772 degrees plus 178. So you will understand why I specify that later. And the baseline is, so we have about 24 grams of regolith that we reduce for 24 hours. We use graphite anode, so we won't produce oxygen, we produce CO2, mainly because we're only interested that this research is really focusing on the reduction aspect at the cathode, so only the cathodic process. The anode process, we know it's for future work, but this is not the focus of this research. The regolith is deep into 800 grams of salt, so this is 1:33 ratio. This is already lowering what the baseline is, which is really closer to 1:50. We will also try to reduce it as less, although salt is not a consumable in this process. If you can bring less to the moon, of course, it makes sense. Regarding the calcium oxide content, this is also key to the process. So here we add 0.8 weight%. We already have 0.2 in a salt. So we have around 1 weight% of calcium oxide in the process. So how do we lower the temperature? So let's say the best strategy is we wanted to keep the calcium chloride element, as this is a strong, an important element of the FFC process, and just to see if we mix it with in a binary mixture with a different salt, there is always a tectic point that we could use to run the process at a lower temperature. So we try to look at this. The tectic point is a different phase diagram that you see here. And basically, we try to keep the same delta to have consistency in the latent heat, for instance, with regard to the melting point. So all the processes were done at melting point plus 178 degrees. So we have then one process at 680, one at 806, and one at 660 degrees. So what did we get with this result? With this different salt mixture? And I'm pressing on the wrong button again. So here on the left, you see the oxygen we removed over the temperature. So we did this experiment, all the tectic experiment. We've made them at a tectic point, as I shown, but we also reproduce them at 950 degrees to have a clear comparison with a traditional baseline at 950. So the oxygen removed here, shown in percentage, is really the oxygen extracted over the oxygen which was available. It can sound a bit trivial, but this is really key information which is missing in the literature to compare the processes between them. So the first thing you could see is we have now a process which works below 700 degrees, and you can extract actually more than 40% of the regolith. As I want really to specify here that there is no mineral beneficiation. We don't target only the ilmenite or anything. We really get the whole lunar simulant. Here, this is with LMS1. But since we know we can reduce all the mineral, olivine, pyroxene, plagioclase, we are confident we could reproduce similar result with a Highland simulant, for instance. So what's also interesting here is that you have you see if you look at the comparison at 950, actually the tectic melts are not that, do not perform as well as the calcium chloride. Mainly because you can have maybe side reaction at this temperature. Since you have two salts, maybe you have also parasitic reaction. The calcium oxide may get out of solution in one of these mixtures. So this is all element which could contribute to the fact that we remove less oxygen at 950 degrees. But of course, the key of the eutectic is not to do it at 950, but to lower the temperature and get to something which is, let's say, easier to handle from the material point of view. We'll come to that after. So one question also which raised was, okay, what would happen if we were still trying to lower the temperature of the calcium chloride, getting closer to the melting point of 772. So this we could not do it yet with a large setup, but we did it with a small one. And actually, so you cannot compare directly let's say the point at 950 because it's a different setup. But basically, what you can compare the trend, and what you can see is, of course, as we lower the temperature and we get closer to the melting point, we lower the efficiency, as of course the heat we give to the system influence the kinetics. This is all experiment after 24 hours. I mean, from the left chart. So of course, showing that we remove 40% below 700 degrees. This is again after 24 hours. After 48 hours or more, we have to see exactly how much we can extract. This is really first results. Regarding the material, we try to, of course, to understand what kind of metal we get. So here's the calcium chloride one, where we got, you saw, close to what was in the literature. So we didn't get 100%, but you see we are at 85% reduction. And here we can already see clear metal phases. Basically, it was hard to find oxygen in this sample, but we have like weird alloys, or not non-traditional, like calcium, silicium, aluminum, silicium, magnesium. We have also like iron, titanium, silicon, aluminum. This is not something you will find naturally, but here it's from the process, from the reduction process, which is in solid state. So this leads to this unusual alloy. One important point to raise as well is when you get to something which is less reduced, it's really hard to understand exactly what happens, mainly because at least with scanning electron microscopy and energy dispersive X-ray, you don't see well what happens. So here we could identify a partially reduced olivine, but you see this is one point among on top of a big grain. Like we could also identify some very local metal phases, but this is really also like just spot over the whole sample. So it's really hard to see exactly what happens in the material between the, let's say, the regolith stage and the full metal. So that's also one important point for the future work. What's another element important that we looked into was actually the Thyroid efficiency. So from all the electrons we pump in a system, how many actually useful to the reduction? So sorry for the credit graph, but here, so you have the same data as I showed before regarding the oxygen reduction, but you also have on top the Thyroid efficiency with which has the symbol with which are hollow inside. And what you can see here is as you get as you reduce the temperature, you basically increase the Thyroid efficiency. But if you reduce it too much, that's what happened in the second case. If you get closer to very close to the melting point, then you start to lower your efficiency again. So basically, you could find an optimum point where, like here would be on the right side, it would be about 900 degrees, where you will have, let's say, your optimum use of your electrons. So that's also important if you want to maximize your Thyroid efficiency. So to sum up about the pros and cons of higher temperature, lower temperature, of course, high temperature, we know already we can have a high yield in an equivalent amount of time, close to 100% in 24 hours. We know the full reduction is possible. This was not the focus here, but we know we can achieve it. It was done. But of course, this is more energy to input in the system, which could be really a limitation if you have a payload. And the material selection, meaning the material for your reactor, and also your anode. Thank you. It's very demanding. Regarding the low temperature, that's of course a big gain of energy you get. We see that we are actually a higher also current efficiency. So yeah, our electrons are more useful. So that's good. And we potentially open the path to many other choices for finding an inert anode, simply because of the lower temperature, so lower degradation. On the con side, so we might need to run the process longer for the same amount of reduction. We don't know yet if we can reach the full metal sample with the Tech6. That's for future work. And so the last point is It's a bit technical, but when we reduce, we might have some part of the calcium which is present in the calcium oxide depositing or being inserted in a partial reduction phases. But in the end, it's not a problem because we recover it at the end. But if we have only partial reduction, then when you remove your sample, you may lose some of your calcium, and then you have to replenish the calcium oxide somehow. So this is, of course, to understand further, but this is a point that might have that we have to keep in mind. So regarding all the knowledge gap and future work for this process. So far, what we have to pre-sinter the regolith simply because for practical reason, it's easier to handle a pellet than a loose powder. Of course, it adds a step to the process. In principle, we can use loose powder as well. It's just that it may fall into the salt, and of course, you want to be able to recover everything you put in. You don't want to pollute your salt. So this is an element that we have to understand. If can we avoid this pre-consolidation by sintering or by some another process, or is it a mandatory step for any long-term operation? How does the regolith degrade the salt over time? So even if we have a temperature at 950, at this temperature, you know that some metals, aluminium, magnesium, they will be in their molten state. So they might be in a melt and then maybe dissolve, and over time maybe accumulate either at the surface, maybe at the bottom. Does it have an impact, or does it degrade the salt over a long time? This is just to be understood, because for this process to work on the moon, the key thing is that the salt should not be consumable, of course. Otherwise, you better bring your oxygen directly. So this is really important to keep the salt clean or to be able to clean it. The minimum salt to mass of regolith ratio. So for now, we know that we have 1 to 33. We try to get it lower. How low, we'll see that as well. About lower temperature, I talked already about it. Is it really more efficient? We have to see with the trade-off on a Lunar mission. What does it look like? The best inert anode also it is of key importance for long-term duration, as you don't want to have your anode degrading. But lowering the temperature gets into this direction. Of course, this is a batch process. So once you remove your regolith, you will have salt sticking on your reduced material, which is fine. I mean, on Earth, you wash it with water. Of course, you could not do that on the moon, but you could maybe do the vacuum distillation or another technique to separate the salt and put it back in a reactor and get your metal powder clean away. So also, if you were yesterday at the rocket refueling session, you probably hear as well that you need really pure oxygen to get into rocket engine. So how we would separate and purify this oxygen, this is of course to be understood. There's been some work on it already, but we really need to make sure we master this end of the process as well. So the energy you need to reduce, let's say, the 40% or 70% of your material is probably as much as what you need to reduce the last bit of the last 10 or 20%. So is it worth really getting metal powder, or is there value for this partially reduced material? This is, of course, for the community to say. We start to investigate into that. But it would be interesting for us to know if actually it is of interest, and if we don't have actually to get metal powder all the time. And last, for now, we know that we have a heterogeneous mixture of alloys. So this weird alloys. So is there a use of that? Can we actually separate them to get pure elements? This is something we have to understand. So we look into maybe using this mixture as metal fuel for 3D printing. But can we actually separate and get maybe the pure silicon you will need for photovoltaic cells? This is the thing we need to look into in the future. And that's it, I think. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Alexander, and thank you for this very interesting presentation on the FFC process. There's a good few questions coming into the chat, but I would like to pose one that's come up twice, which is, do you have any feeling for what percentage of electrolyte loss you might experience from batch to batch at this stage?
So at this stage, we are really focused on, let's say, on understanding, let's say, the chemistry or the potential of the process. Of course, if you think about opening your reactor to lunar vacuum, you will lose a lot of salt, and this is not, of course, the way to go. But So for now, the sample is covered with salt. I can't give you a mass of how much we lose every time. This is really dependent on the configuration, the way you have your anode and your cathode, and the configuration of, let's say, of your, and the geometry of your system. So this will be part of the study as we get closer to flight hardware.
Great, thank you, Alexander. And again, I'd point you towards those questions in the chat channel. There's a few ones, follow-on questions there.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to our next speaker, Veneranda Lopez Diaz from LIST, talking on towards the prospection of water ice on the moon and beyond, on the need for better understanding of water ice sublimation rate and related O and hydrogen isotope fractionation. So if you're there, Veranda, I'm probably mispronouncing your name, apologies, but the floor is yours.
Thank you. I cannot see the slides.
There is a few seconds delay before they come on screen, so.
So. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I had a technical problem. So thank you for letting me present the activity that we are doing at the Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology. I am going to talk about the relevance of a better understanding of just a question, Aidan. How I can stop to listen from the two parts?
You're better just giving the presentation as you have it on your screen there. There's
Yes.
about a 15-second delay before it goes onto the main room. So. Can you see your presentation? Can you control it? No?
I can, yes, now I can see it, sorry. Yeah, I am going to talk about the relevance of better understanding the sublimation rates and related isotope fractionation, oxygen and nitrogen isotope fractionation. No, I'm sorry. I listen myself from two sides.
Please close your browser window.
Which window?
Your browser window, and do everything in the Zoom channel, and then you double click the MB10 channel and pin it in Zoom.
Now I am in Zoom. So how can I see my presentation in Zoom? Sorry.
Just go to gallery view on the right top. Then you should see a speaker called MB10.
Yes.
Please pin it. And this should be now large. Maybe you could go back to talk view.
Yes. Now, sorry. Now is the good time. So sorry for the inconvenience. And as I have said, thank you for letting me present in the activity we are doing at Luxembourg Institute of Science and Technology. And I am going to talk about the relevance of better understanding the sublimation rate and related oxygen and nitrogen isotope fractionation for water ice prospecting on the moon. So the prospection of extraterrestrial water ice can give also scientific information, can give information about the formation and evolution of the solar system, about the formation and evolution of the Earth-Moon system, about the sources of water in the Earth-Moon system, isotopic signature of the comet nucleus, and also it can give information about the water cycle on the moon. And a better understanding of the water cycle on the moon and also the exohydrology could help to boost the progress in terrestrial hydrology, and a progress in both the hydrology hydrology and terrestrial hydrology could have some synergies to boost the progress in both fields. So the water cycle on the moon is poorly understood, and the origin of the lunar water is also poorly understood. So lunar water can be indigenous water, later addition water that come from asteroids, comets, water created by solar wind implantation. And depending on the origin of this lunar water, the hydrogen isotope signature will be very different. It will range from minus 900 per mil if it comes from solar wind implantation, up to plus 30,000 per mil if it comes from interstellar ices. So up to now, the lunar sample analysis have shown a very wide range of hydrogen isotope signature. What means that it could come from a mixing of multiple reservoirs of different origin, or can be due to secondary processes. Those secondary processes are also poorly understood. And one of those secondary processes is sublimation, and it contributes to the water ice deposit loss. So a better understanding of water ice sublimation will allow to better estimate the water ice stability of the water ice deposits. At the same time, this sublimation will create isotope fractionation. That means that it will change the isotopic signature of the remaining ice that is going to be measured. So a better understanding of the fractionation during sublimation will allow to infer the original isotope signature of the water ice deposit. By knowing the origin of the water ice deposit, we can it will help to estimate the stability of the renewability of the water ice deposit, and in turn help to estimate whether this water ice deposit can be considered as a reserve. Of course, prospection of lunar water ice is important for space mining, not only on the moon, but also asteroids, Mars, and beyond, because it is important also for in-situ resource utilization, satellites, future missions, as it can be used as propelling, radiation shield, thermal management, and life support consumables. Knowing the abundance of the water ice will help to estimate whether these water ice deposits can be considered as resources, and by knowing the isotope composition will give information about the lunar water origin, distribution and redistribution mechanisms, and those two things will help to estimate the renewability, and in turn help to estimate whether they can be considered as reserves. Also, it will help to design the extraction and processing techniques. Knowing the physical form of water will also help to design the extraction and processing techniques. We need to come back to the moon, do in-situ analysis, and prospect. One of the lunar polar exploration missions that is planned is Luna 27, that is going to fly on 2025 to the moon's south pole. So one of its payloads is the prospect package that it will characterize the lunar polar volatiles. So part of the data processing, there is the need of better understanding the extent and nature of any potential changes that the water ice may undergo during the sampling chain, meaning that we need to know the amount of water ice that is expected to be lost during the sampling chain, and also the isotopic fractionation that this sublimation will create. So knowing that, it will help to infer the original water ice abundance and the original isotope signature of the collected sample. Regarding data interpretation, there is a need for better understanding of the water cycle on the moon. So we are very happy to be part of the Prospect Science team, and we hope that all research will contribute to these two goals. So the research gaps is that the sublimation rate of water ice and icy regolith and the related isotope fractionation process is poorly understood in extraterrestrial and lunar conditions. So these so the calculation of the abundance of water ice and related isotope signatures remains highly uncertain. So this hinders the assessment of potential lunar water resources and interpretation of scientific data. So there is limited data on isotope fractionation related to sublimation processes. There is also limited thermodynamic and kinetic data at low temperatures, and the equilibrium isotope fractionation factor models there were extracted from experiments only down to 233 kelvins. Up to our knowledge, there is not a kinetic isotope fractionation model that takes into account the expected physical processes in high vacuum system at low temperatures. So there is the need for experimental data on sublimation and related isotope fractionation for pure ice and ice regolith mixtures, leading to a new theoretical framework and modeling tools. So normally the lack of this data is linked to technological constraints. So to overcome those technological limitations, we have developed a sublimation prototype to carry out sublimation under higher vacuum and lower temperatures than the existent setups reached, and under non-equilibrium conditions. So this is the first version of the prototype, and we have protected it, filling 2 patents. We are still in the embargo period, but later we plan to go further with industrial partners and develop it further, and also adapt it for terrestrial applications. So the specifications for this first version are a temperature range of 103 to 473 kelvins, a base pressure of 10 to the minus 8 millibars, sublimation pressure of 10 to the minus 7 millibars, that's around 163 kelvins, high evacuation rate.
5 minutes left.
Yeah, okay. High evacuation rate and high recovery yields, and so the sublimation will be at a stable temperature, and we allow temperature difference within the sublimation volume. So this is offline version, but we have in mind also an inline version, and the collected samples will be analyzed with a laser spectrometer for hydrogen and isotope signatures. So our objectives is to produce experimental data on poorly known water ice sublimation and related oxygen and hydrogen isotope fractionation in high vacuum and low temperature environments, and also produce an improved sublimation rate model and an enhanced isotope fractionation model for a more robust interpretation of water ice behavior in a lunar environment. And it is relevant because it will help to establish an accurate and robust measurement technique and data processing for robotic lunar polar exploration missions and missions to other planetary bodies. It will help to better understand the water origin, stability, water cycle on the moon, climate history of other planets and other scientific questions, and it will help to better estimate the origin, distribution, stability, renewability, and viability of water deposits as resources or reserves for space mining. Also, it has terrestrial applications. It will help to better understand the water cycle, terrestrial water cycle, origin, size, distribution, and renewability of terrestrial water resources, soil, plant evapotranspiration, and water mass balance in snow, ice sheets, glacier, permafrost, and Antarctica region. And yeah. With that, I finished my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and sorry for my technical problems at the beginning.
That's no problem. Thank you for the very interesting presentation on prospecting and so forth. I am conscious of the time, so I will leave the questions for the moment and move on to our final speaker of the session. So this is David Carl of TU Berlin, and he's going to give us a talk on wet processing and synthetic H2O weathering of unrefined regolith towards high-strength sandcastles. So, David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Aidan. It's wonderful to be with you in this finishing up this panel. Okay, the clicker works. Thank you very much. I'm going to start. And this is a novel idea I want to present. It's the first time I'm presenting this. I will first introduce myself a little bit because I'm actually a little bit more about Mars. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about previous work. And if I'm going to slow down, where is all published work, you can access it, and also the slides will be available later. So we introduced wet processing for non-clay Martian simulant, JSC Mars 1, and we could build complex geometries with this, and also sintering with ceramic institute, so we could well do this. Then we went on to wet processing of clay Martian simulants with the new Mars Global simulants, added clay, smectite clay. And we produced green bodies, what you could call adobe structures, so just dried clay, and also sintered these. And the interesting thing here is we could use or apply all typical processing approaches to these materials. So we did slip casting, we actually hand modeled these materials. Also, we dry pressed them as a reference, and we used additive manufacturing, for example, material extrusion in this case, but also a highly developed 3D printing method called layer-wise slurry deposition, which is a real 3D printing method. And this produced quite good green bodies that could be used as such. I will show you in a second. But also we did a lot of sintering tests on this, and vastly characterized the sintering of these materials in normal oxidizing air, so terrestrial air, and in simulated Martian conditions. We gave this proof of concept for these adobe structures, and just a hint at all the colleagues here presenting, when we're talking about dry pressing, we could, for these Martian simulants with clay that already have a very high dry pressing strength, we found a dry pressing compressive strength of, like, let's say 2 MPa. As soon as you went to wet processing, which is the thing we're mostly interested in, we found that slip casting produced double the compressive strengths in green bodies. And then if we hand modeled them even higher, and for robocasting, so 3D printing using material extrusion, that was actually 7 MPa compressive strength. And if we use this very special 3D printing technology, where there's also like a 5 weight% binder, we had compressive strengths for green bodies, unsintered, non-processed, just clay simulants that were wet processed and 3D printed with a binder of 5 volume%. That was 30 MPa, so similar to concrete. This is really significant. And we have compared this in this Acta Astronautica paper to other materials approaches for Mars, and our materials fare very well with this. Okay, if we go to sintering these 3D printed green bodies, we could produce Weibel distributions for sintering and oxidizing atmosphere that were as high for flexural strengths of 57 MPa and Weibel models of 10. And if we sintered in simulated Martian atmosphere, we saw 53 MPa, very similar. And with this, our materials in terms of flexural strengths are really high up in the chart. They're quite a bit porous, so these sintered Martian simulants, but they're comparable in strengths to porcelain, which is significant. And compared with other Martian simulation papers, simulant papers, we are right at the left top and the right for the flexural strengths over materials required beyond proven surface minerals. And this, I think, is significant. Okay, with this as a background, I know all of you guys are very interested in lunar stuff. So I was like, okay, what can we do on the moon? Everybody wants the moon. Nobody wants the Mars in Europe. So there was this call, and Advenit sent me this call for the EL3 lander, and he asked me, can you do something with this? And then I was like, okay, what would happen if we propose a wet chemistry lab for EL3? So what would happen to lunar regolith if you add water? And this is a very interesting question, because it has been proven, or it's been proposed, that no other natural silicate mineral would be as reactive to water as lunar regolith for various reasons. And what is also important is that mineral dissolution is inversely proportional to particle size. So water will dissolve primarily lunar minerals. Then this water regolith interaction is a real research need, because this will happen as soon as there will be a presence on the moon. And we're lucky, the Cooper and McKay et al., they researched this a little bit with real lunar regolith from Apollo. And they found that if they mixed water with real lunar regolith and aged this for 3 days, that there was a mineral dissolution, and quite significant so. In normal water, in deionized water, they had silicon leaching, for example. Let's just look at the top line for silicon. This could be increased significantly if they used a pH 4 buffer solution. And so there's a lot of leaching going on already after 3 days for real lunar regolith. So I was like, okay, what can we do with this? This is really interesting. So I thought, we could propose something along the route of sandcastles, yeah? And my research question was like, why are sandcastles that are hard after they dry? And this would go as follows. In A, you see if we do water weathering, basically mixing lunar regolith with water, there would be this dissolution that Cooper and McKay showed. And if we then would reduce the water, for example, by boiling and then getting back the water, of course, you don't want to lose water on the moon, you would form these capillary bridges, and this would be basically a wet processing. So this would also kind of be the process where a kid can form a sandcastle on the beach. Yeah, you have particles, and then you have these liquid bridges. If you even dry this further, what would happen would be a precipitation of minerals at the contact points. And this is basically then a dried sandcastle. And depending on how you do this, this could get quite strong. What is interesting here is, of course, if you look back at B, these capillary bridges, this is ideal for processing, for various processes, because then you have a mixture that you might even be able to pump and so on and so on. So there's a lot of interesting research questions here. And because this was really like just on the weekend idea, and then I just went to the lab, and then I used some very simple lunar simulants, and this is basically some typical ceramic feldspar, which you will now see in this presentation going on. VH, it's called, is a potassium feldspar, and K30 is a sodium feldspar, and these are really not good lunar simulants, yeah? Just so you know, we're aware of this. But we used them anyway because it was such a nice idea to try over the weekend. And so we mixed, when we look at this sandcastle idea, we mixed quartz sand with deionized water, with Berlin tap water, which has some ions, with a buffer solution similar to McKay and al. Then this simulant, this feldspar simulant, and deionized water. And where you could build these sandcastles, of course, as long as they were wet, But after drying, you see something really interesting in B, and this is the quartz sand with deionized water will just crumble. And the same will happen to Berlin tap water. But if you, for example, go to silica, so this quartz sand with a buffer solution, of course, the buffer creates some hold. And so you start getting some dried sandcastle that is solid. And even more so, just with deionized water in small particles. On the right, you see the particle size for these feldspar materials. This will somehow create some stable body. If we now force this, we did a leaching study. We used this K-feldspar and mixed in deionized water in this buffer solution and this sodium feldspar, and here we compared to the Apollo results from McKay. And in deionized water, we have similar results of silicon leaching. It's a very, very rudimentary simulant, of course. But the Lunar simulant in buffer has a very, very high silicon leaching and also aluminum leaching. And we're just currently on the way to using various Lunar simulants to kind of reproduce this, but I'm not sure how long this will take to dissolve so much silicon aluminum. Anyway, this is just some rudimentary results. If we now go to processing of really using leached solutions, so here you see powder compacts from 4 feldspar slurries that were aged on a roller bank for 3 days, and there's a 50% of these feldspar slurry mixed with 50% quartz sand. Thank you. And then if the high amount of water is reduced, for example, here by heating or cooking, then these pastes are molded into these blocks by hand, and the cylinder is left to dry for 60 minutes, and then we see some compressive strengths. Okay, this is not fantastic compressive strengths, of course, but we see for the different compressive strengths, but it's reproducible process. The best compressive strength was for this VH feldspar in buffer solution, which is not so surprising because also there is these buffer chemicals in there that are dried and that can be expected to help on the compressive strengths. So this was really a paper that we did in a week, and that was really fun to do. But why is this significant? So I think this is a really novel idea, and it goes along the lines of what happens on Earth. So on Earth, you have solid rocks that interact with water, and then you have mineral dissolution, and so this H2 weathering, where there's also a lot of good knowledge on this, because everybody in the scientific community is looking for these aged minerals, for example, on Mars, and also in asteroids, because there's a hint for the presence of water, of course. And if you then have this precipitation, you get these secondary phyllosilicate minerals. And clays, these phyllosilicates, are real functional materials. So there's hundreds of applications on Earth for phyllosilicates. Yeah, and we already know a lot of phyllosilicates in the solar system. And this has to do with the layer structure of phyllosilicates. What we could do on the moon that would not be so hard is we would do this water weathering of lunar regolith. And of course, this, as I said, this leaching is inversely proportional to the particle size. We already have these very fine particles lying around, of course. And then if you do ion precipitation, you would get to various kinds of clay, of course. And these clays could be used in all kinds of ways as real functional materials. As I showed earlier for these Mars simulants, that we could have building materials, there's no sintering involved, would be good enough or are good enough on Earth to build skyscrapers that are 30 meters high, sorry. But we could do, of course, ceramics with this and various other things. So just generally functional materials. I'm not going to go into detail on this because maybe there's 1 or 2 questions left. So we are investigating this. We have assembled a large number of simulants on this. Lunar simulants, and we're currently in the phase of leaching studies and looking at towards the way of making synthesizing phyllosilicates from simulants But of course, this simulants will not be so good for this. The best thing would be, of course, to have real lunar soil, because you would get completely different results, which can be expected to simulants. Please just check out the scientific publications that I showed you. Everything is published that I showed. Yes, I think my collaborators at TU Berlin, at Baumet's 3D Lab, I'm especially grateful to Exolid Lab. I think they do an incredible service to the community. And I think my founding agencies. And with that, I will finish. Thank you.
Great, thank you, David. Very interesting talk. I just one question there from Clive Neal in the chat there. He's asking, why did you use K feldspar and albidic feldspar when these minerals are relatively rare on the moon?
I completely agree. I am sorry, I'm a bit ashamed myself. Thank you, Clive, for still being here. It was something, you know, this idea you have on the weekend, and then you run in the lab on Sunday, and then you're looking for some feldspar. And this was the feldspar that was there. It was really, this whole paper was really done in a week. I was writing already all the community to give me some simulants, but it's really hard to get simulants sometimes from the community, and also they will not be fast. So I was waiting for some months to get some real simulants. And be advised, I have the results now for real simulants. Yeah, we will definitely publish this.
Okay, great. Thanks, David, for that. Very interesting talk to cap out this overall very exciting and very interesting research and development session. So first of all, I'd like to again thank all our speakers who took the time to present today. I think it was a really exciting and interesting session with a lot of really valuable technical contributions being made here for the Space Resources Week. I'd also like to thank the viewers who stuck around a little bit longer than we anticipated. I hope you all really enjoyed this session, and I hope you're enjoying this Space Resources Week, and we hope to see you all tomorrow. And at that point, I will call this session to an end and wish you all a happy evening, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Have a good evening, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.